Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are opening up a topic that I honestly think is going to explain a lot of those why am I like this moments for a huge chunk of our listeners. We're looking at a specific kind of internal civil war.
It's a really fascinating topic, and civil war is actually a pretty apt description for what we're covering today.
Right. I mean, we're talking about the experience of feeling like a living contradiction. I want you to picture this for a second. Have you ever felt like your brain has one foot slammed on the gas, pedal-like floored, engine roaring, and the other foot is slammed hard on the brake at the exact same time?
That is the classic analogy, yeah. The engine is revving so hard you can see smoke coming off the tires, but the car, it isn't actually going anywhere.
Exactly. It's that feeling where part of you craves routine, you need structure, maybe you even get a little panicked if plans change, but that other part of you is just screaming for novelty, hates being bored, and basically wants to burn the entire schedule to the ground just to see what happens.
And for so long, people living with this just thought, well, I'm complicated or,
Yeah.
I'm just a mess.
Correct.
But what we're looking at today is the specific clinical and lived intersection of Autism Spectrum Disorder and Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder.
AuDHD.
AuDHD, that's the community term for it. And we have just a massive stack of research today. Clinical studies, the DSM-5 updates, lived experience narratives, neurodiversity advocacy papers to really unpack what happens when these two neurotypes collide in one person.
And the mission today is pretty clear. We want to move way past the dry medical definitions. I mean, we'll get into science, obviously. I want to know all about the dopamine and the synaptic pruning. But we really want to understand the lived reality of this. Why were these two things kept separate for so long? How do you even tell the difference between them? And how does understanding this overlap actually change everything for diagnosis and, honestly, just for getting through the day without completely burning out?
It changes the entire framework, the whole way you view yourself. It moves the conversation from what is wrong with me to, okay, how does my specific operating system actually function?
So let's start with the history, because this just blew my mind when I was reading through the materials. I sort of assumed that if you had both conditions, you'd just get diagnosed with both. Like if you have a broken leg and the flu, the doctor doesn't say, well, we can only treat the leg today. But that really wasn't the case with autism and ADHD, was it?
No, not at all. And this is such a crucial piece of context for why we are seeing such an explosion of diagnoses right now, especially in adults. If you went to a doctor before 2013, which really isn't that long ago, and you showed clear signs of both autism and ADHD, the diagnostic manual, the DSM-IV, actually forbade a dual diagnosis.
It was explicitly against the rules, like a doctor couldn't do it.
Technically, yes. The criteria stated that a diagnosis of autism precluded a diagnosis of ADHD. The clinical thinking at the time was hierarchical. They believed that if you had autism, any of the inattention or the hyperactivity you were displaying was just a symptom of the autism. It wasn't seen as a separate comorbid condition. So clinicians, they had to choose one bucket.
That is just wild. So you had thousands, maybe millions of people who were essentially only getting half the picture of their own brain.
Precisely. I mean, imagine a patient back in, say, 2005. Let's say it's a kid struggling in school. They are fidgety, they're impulsive, they can't focus, all the classic ADHD signs. But they also have really intense sensory issues, and they struggle with social cues. The doctor sees the most disruptive symptoms first, diagnoses ADHD, and prescribes a stimulant.
Okay, so they get the meds. That should help, right?
Well, yes and no. And this is where it gets complicated. The medication might suddenly clear up the brain fog of ADHD. But now, without that fog acting as a sort of buffer, their autistic sensitivities can go through the roof. Suddenly, the lights in the classroom are painfully bright, the noises are louder, they become more rigid in their thinking because their underlying anxiety spikes. The treatment for one half of their brain actually made the other half much, much worse because nobody knew the other half was there.
That sounds like an absolute nightmare. You'd think the meds were making you worse or that you were having a bad reaction.
Exactly. And then came 2013. The DSM-5 was released, and it completely changed the rules. It allowed for comorbidity, meaning you could officially be diagnosed with both. And the sources we looked at described this as opening the floodgates.
Man, I can only imagine.
All of a sudden, you had this lost generation of adults, and even children who had been partially misdiagnosed, realizing that the reason their treatment or their coping strategies weren't fully working was because they were only ever addressing half the problem.
And the numbers that back this up are, they're staggering. We're not talking about a tiny fraction of people here.
No, not at all. The estimates do vary a bit because the research is still catching up. But the sources we have suggest that anywhere from 50 to 70% of autistic individuals also meet the full criteria for ADHD.
That's the majority. That almost suggests that having only autism might be the minority experience compared to having both.
It does suggest that, and it's a huge shift in thinking. And if you flip it up to a quarter, and some of the newer sources say even more, of children with ADHD display clinically significant signs of autism.
It really makes you wonder if they are even truly separate things or if they're just, I don't know, cousins on a spectrum, or maybe different flavors of the same ice cream.
Well, that's the big debate happening in the scientific community right now. The research we read mentions twin studies and family studies showing a 50 to 72% overlap in the contributing genetic factors. So on a biological level, they share incredibly deep roots. These aren't just two random conditions that happen to bump into each other. They seem to be genetically entangled.
Which brings us to the actual experience itself, because if you have both, it's not just autism plus ADHD, is it? It's not a simple addition where you just stack one set of symptoms on top of the other.
Yeah, it's a unique phenotype. That's
Yeah.
a fancy way of saying it's a distinct neurotype with its own unique flavor. The traits interact. They mask each other and they amplify each other. And that's where we get right back to that tug-of-war analogy you started with.
Okay, let's really unpack that tug-of-war, because the examples in the sources were so relatable, even for me, and I don't have this diagnosis. But for someone living it, it must be constant. The biggest battleground seems to be the routine.
Oh, this is the classic AuDHD conflict. The autistic side of the brain tends to prioritize safety through predictability. It's a nervous system thing. It's, I need to know exactly what's happening next to feel okay. I need a plan.
Right. Don't change the plan. The plan is the only thing keeping the chaos away.
Exactly. But the ADHD side of the brain is dopamine-driven. It's a novelty-seeking system. It gets bored instantly with predictability. It sees a routine and thinks, "Ugh, this again."
Okay, so let's play this out. I call this the Sunday morning paradox. You wake up on Sunday, you're feeling really motivated, you get out your colorful pens, your planner, you map out the perfect week, meal prep, gym at 6 a.m., focused work blocks. You feel great, right?
You feel amazing. The autistic side feels safe and secure because there's a structure, and the ADHD side is actually getting a huge dopamine hit from the novelty of making the plan itself. Planning is fun.
But then Tuesday morning rolls around, 6 a.m., the alarm goes off for the gym.
And the ADHD side wakes up and realizes, wait a second, I have to do this just because a piece of paper I wrote 2 days ago told me to.
And suddenly that beautiful color-coded schedule feels like a prison cell.
It feels like a trap. The ADHD brain craves freedom and impulse. So you rebel against your own plan.
Yeah.
You hit snooze.
Yeah.
You burn it all down. But then, and here's the real kicker, the autistic side starts to panic because now there's no structure. The day's a void.
So you spiral into paralysis.
You spiral. And the guilt sets in. People think, why can't I stick to this? Why am I so undisciplined? They don't realize they are literally caught in a neurological crossfire between a deep need for order and an equally deep need for chaos.
Another one that really stood out to me was socializing, this idea of the extroverted introvert.
Yes, this is so common in the AuDHD experience.
So someone with just ADHD might be like, a party. Yes, people, stimulation, I'm going.
Correct. The ADHD side is impulsive, it's eager to connect, maybe talks a lot. It wants that dopamine hit of social interaction, so you say yes to the invite immediately without even checking your internal energy battery.
But then you get to the party.
And the autistic side hits a wall of sensory overwhelm. You've been there for maybe 20 minutes. The novelty of being there has worn off for the ADHD brain, and now the autistic sensory processing takes over. And it's saying, the music is too bass heavy, the lights are flickering, there are 6 conversations happening at once, and I don't have the script for how to politely exit this one.
So you're the person who's arguably the most excited person to go out, and now you're hiding in the bathroom, scrolling on your phone, or you just do an Irish exit and disappear without telling anyone.
And people find that really confusing. They'll say, but you were so excited to come, you're so outgoing. They don't see that internal switch flip from seek stimulation to protect the system at all costs.
There's also a really interesting distinction in the sources between special interests and hyperfixations. I think I've always used those terms interchangeably, but they're different mechanisms, right?
They can be. Though in AuDHD, they often blend together in a very specific way. In a more, let's say, pure autism presentation, a special interest is often deep, long-term, and very intense. It's a comfort zone. You might love trains or mycology or the history of the Roman Empire for 20 years. It regulates you.
It's like a warm blanket for the brain, a safe place to go.
Exactly. And ADHD hyperfixation, on the other hand, is different. It is often shorter, sometimes even more intense, and it's driven by that dopamine hit of something new and challenging. It's the, I'm going to learn everything about knitting right now. You buy all the yarn online, you watch 10 hours of YouTube tutorials.
And you knit one scarf that looks like a tragic accident, and then 2 weeks later, you never want to see a knitting needle again for the rest of your life.
Precisely. Because the dopamine dried up. The challenge was gone, the novelty faded.
I feel so called out. I have a garage full of hobbies that die at a noble death after a month.
We call that the graveyard of abandoned hobbies. It's a very real thing. In AuDHD, these things can cycle incredibly rapidly. You might have the intensity of the autistic special interest, where you must know everything, but the duration of the ADHD hyperfixation.
That sounds both exciting and incredibly painful.
Yep.
But here's where it gets so tricky for diagnosis, and something the sources really highlighted: this cancel-out effect. One condition can actually mask the other. How does that even work?
This is why so many people, especially adults who are seen as high-functioning, get missed for decades. Imagine someone with pretty severe ADHD impulsivity. Typically, they might struggle socially because they interrupt people or act without thinking.
The classic bull in a china shop effect.
Right. But what if they also have high autistic anxiety about social rules and a deep, deep desire to do things the right way? That anxiety can act like a governor on the engine. It dampens the impulsivity.
So they don't interrupt?
They don't. But the impulse is absolutely still there. They are internally vibrating with the effort of holding it back. They are manually monitoring their face, their hands, their tone. On the outside, they look calm and collected, maybe a little stiff or quiet. Internally, they are running a mental marathon just to appear neurotypical.
Or what about the flip side of that?
The flip side works too. The autistic side might be very organized and rigid about certain things, which compensates for the underlying ADHD disorganization. So they might never miss a deadline at work, but the mental cost to maintain that level of structure is astronomical compared to a neurotypical person. They are pedaling twice as hard just to go the same speed.
This is why so many people get missed, isn't it? They look fine from the outside until they just hit a wall.
That's it, exactly. The internal compensation works until the energy runs out. It usually happens in college or when they have their first child or get a big promotion at work. The complexity of life finally exceeds their capacity to manually compensate for everything, and they burn out.
So we've established that it's this complex mix, but I want to get a little more granular, if we can. The sources have this great breakdown of disentangling the threads. Let's use a really concrete example. Let's talk about grocery shopping.
Ah, yes. The grocery store.
Yeah.
The ultimate gauntlet for the AuDHD brain.
Okay, walk me through it. Let's do pure ADHD versus pure autism versus the AuDHD experience.
Okay, so a person with just ADHD goes to the store. They probably forgot their list. They're walking down an aisle. They see a new flavor of Oreos. Ooh, shiny. And they grab it. They get distracted by a magazine at checkout. They leave with a cart full of snacks and impulse buys, but no actual ingredients for dinner. It's chaotic, maybe a little fun, until they get home and realize they still have no food.
Right. Totally impulse driven.
Now, a person with just autism goes to the store. They have a list. It is probably sorted by aisle. They go to buy the exact same brand of peanut butter they have bought every week for the last 10 years. If the store has rearranged the aisles, or if their specific brand is out of stock, it is a genuine crisis. It can cause real distress. They might even abandon their cart and leave because the disruption is too much.
Okay, routine and predictability driven.
Now, the AuDHD experience. You make the rigorous categorized list, that's the autism, because you need the structure to feel safe. You get to the store. The fluorescent lights are buzzing, the music is awful, it's sensory hell, autism. But then you see the new Oreos. That's the ADHD. You crave the dopamine, you grab them, you start deviating from the list. The ADHD side is now driving the cart, tossing things in.
But the autistic side is in the passenger seat just screaming.
Exactly. The autistic side is getting more and more anxious about the deviation from the plan and the increasing sensory overload. You finally get to the checkout and you are utterly exhausted. You get home, and you might have a meltdown because in your ADHD impulse state, you bought the wrong texture of yogurt, and now your autistic sensory system refuses to let you eat it.
That sounds unbelievably draining just to buy groceries.
It is. It's a constant second-by-second negotiation between two opposing needs inside one brain.
Let's look at social interaction again, because that's another big one. How do you tell the difference between ADHD social struggles and autistic social struggles? It seems like they could look similar from the outside.
It's often about the why behind the struggle. With ADHD, the social struggle is often about regulation. You're eager to engage, you have a thought, you're excited, and so you interrupt someone. Or You completely zone out because of inattention and miss a really important social cue because you were suddenly fascinated by a dog across the street.
Right. So it's not that you can't read the room, it's that you weren't even paying attention to the room in the first place.
Often, yes. Whereas with autism, the struggle is more often about the fundamental mechanics of communication. Things like difficulty with reciprocity, that back and forth tennis match of a conversation, or finding sustained eye contact, physically uncomfortable, or even painful like staring into the sun, or taking language very, very literally and completely missing sarcasm or subtext.
So the AuDHD mix is interrupting someone because of an impulsive thought, ADHD, and then spending the next 3 days replaying and analyzing the conversation because you're not sure if they were mad at you for interrupting autism.
Precisely. Or being verbally gifted, having a huge vocabulary and talking a mile a minute, ADHD. But struggling with the pragmatics, like knowing when it's your turn to stop talking or how to enter a conversation gracefully without just jumping in, autism.
What about executive dysfunction? We hear that term all the time with ADHD, but you're saying it's an autism thing too.
It is, absolutely. But again, it can have different drivers. Executive dysfunction, that trouble with planning, organizing, initiating tasks, is a huge feature of both. But in ADHD, it's often a problem of regulating attention and a lack of dopamine. You can't start the task because the task itself doesn't provide the chemical reward your brain needs to get going.
That I know I need to do it, I want to do it, but I'm glued to the couch feeling.
Right. In autism, there's a related but different concept called autistic inertia, which is tied to a theory called monotropism, which we should definitely get into. It's not just that you can't start. It's that once your brain's train is moving on a particular track, it is physically painful and disorienting to stop or change direction.
So, as a simplification, ADHD is hard to start, autism is hard to stop or switch.
That's a really helpful way to think about it, yes. And for the AuDHD, you get the joy of both. You can't bring yourself to start the laundry, but once you start organizing your bookshelf by color, you literally cannot stop to eat dinner, even if you're starving.
Okay, let's get under the hood a bit. Segment 4 in our research is about the brain itself. We've touched on dopamine, but what is actually happening on a biological level that creates this living contradiction?
It's a really fascinating clash of biology from what the research suggests. On one hand, you have the ADHD brain, which is generally understood to have a dysregulated dopamine system. It is starving for stimulation and for reward. It's a hunter, constantly scanning the environment for the next interesting thing.
It's like a gas pedal.
The gas pedal. On the other hand, a lot of the newer research into the autistic brain suggests differences in a process called synaptic pruning.
Synaptic pruning. I've heard this term, but explain it to me like I'm 5.
Okay. Imagine your brain, when you're a baby, is a dense forest. You have billions of little trails connecting every tree to every other tree. As you grow up and learn, a neurotypical brain brings in a kind of a bulldozer. It prunes or clears away the little trails that aren't used very often, and it paves the main highways to make them super fast and efficient.
So you eventually stop noticing the hum of the refrigerator because that little neural trail gets cut.
Exactly. The brain decides, this isn't important data, and it cuts the connection to save energy. The autistic brain, it's theorized, has reduced pruning. The bulldozer just doesn't show up as much, so all those little trails, they stay open.
So the main highway is there, but so are all the little dirt roads and footpaths.
Yes. It creates a state of high neural density. And this means that every signal travels. You don't just hear the conversation you're in, you hear the fridge, the traffic outside, you feel the tag on your shirt, you see the flicker of the light bulb. Your brain is processing everything at once with equal priority.
So you have a brain that is taking in way too much information all the time, autism, but is simultaneously starving for stimulation and novelty, ADHD.
Precisely. It is oversensitive and understimulated at the exact same time. It's a recipe for chronic exhaustion and overwhelm.
This brings us to the concept of time blindness. This is a huge topic in the ADHD community, but it's really relevant here too.
It is. Time blindness is the inability to accurately sense the passing of time. For many, it's living in a permanent state of just 2 times, now and not now.
I loved the analogy in the sources about the conductor of an orchestra.
Yes, the idea of executive function as the conductor. In this brain, the conductor is, well, they're often missing. The violinists are brilliant, the drummers are enthusiastic, but nobody knows when to come in or how long a beat lasts. So you're late, not because you don't care or you're disrespectful, but because your brain genuinely cannot calculate all the little steps needed to get out the door and how long each one will take.
And then there's this other concept you mentioned, monotropism. The sources say this is absolutely crucial for understanding the autistic side of the equation.
It's a really powerful theory. Monotropism suggests that autistic attention is like a tunnel or a single intense beam of light. Neurotypical attention is more polytropic. It's like a floodlight. It can handle multiple streams of interest at once. It can scan the horizon. Monotropism is singular. You enter an attention tunnel.
This sounds a lot like what people call a flow state.
It is. It's a deep flow state. And when an autistic person is in that tunnel, they're highly capable, they're happy, they're regulated. This is where the special interest lives. The problem is that the modern world demands us all to be polytropic. The phone rings, the baby cries, the boss sends an urgent email.
And being pulled out of that tunnel.
It's neurologically painful. It causes immense distress. We talk about the transition cost. For a neurotypical person, switching tasks is like stepping off a curb. For a monotropic person, it's like being violently thrown off a moving train.
Wow. That explains the meltdowns that can happen when an autistic person is interrupted from something they're focused on?
Yes. It's not a temper tantrum. It's a neurological derailment. The brain is scrambling to reorient itself, and the sensory and emotional shock of being ripped out of that flow state is completely overwhelming.
That makes me rethink so many interactions I've seen. It's not about being stubborn, it's about inertia.
Precisely. It's the physics of the mind.
I want to shift gears now to who is getting diagnosed and maybe more importantly, who isn't. Because there seems to be a massive gender gap here. Why are girls and women so often diagnosed so much later in life, if at all?
Well, historically, all the clinical research focused on young, hyperactive, predominantly white boys. The prototype was the Dennis the Menace kid, running around the classroom, climbing the walls, being disruptive.
Right. The disruption is externalized, so it gets noticed.
Exactly. But the female presentation, and this applies to many high-masking individuals regardless of their gender, is often internalized. Instead of running around, the chaos is all on the inside. It manifests as anxiety, as perfectionism, as intense daydreaming.
The classic, she's just a quiet, dreamy girl in her own world.
Or she's so well-behaved and tries so hard. Because girls are, from a very young age, socially conditioned to be accommodating, to be people-pleasers. And this directly fuels masking or camouflaging behaviors.
We use that word masking a lot, but I want to dig into what that actually feels like day to day. It's not just hiding your traits. The sources describe it as active, constant, almost metabolic work.
It's like running social software in manual mode, all day, every day. Imagine you are trying to drive a car with a manual transmission in heavy traffic, but everyone else has an automatic. You have to consciously think about every single step. Okay, push the clutch, shift the gear, look at their eyes for 3 seconds. Now look away so it's not weird. Smile now. They told a joke. Laugh, not too loud.
And all of that is happening while you're also actively suppressing your natural instincts.
Yes. Physically suppressing the urge to stim or fidget. Forcing yourself to make eye contact when it feels painful. Developing different characters or personas for work, for school, for home. It is method acting. 247 with no script.
That just sounds utterly exhausting.
The sources consistently use words like exhausting and soul-destroying. Because if you do it for long enough, you start to lose your own identity. You think, I don't even know who I really am anymore. I only know who I'm pretending to be to survive. And eventually, the energy for the performance runs out and you hit burnout.
And this leads directly to this idea of the lost generation.
It does. It's a whole generation of adults, often women, who are only figuring this out in their 30s, 40s, or even later. Very often, the catalyst is taking their own child to get diagnosed. They sit in the psychologist's office, hear the list of traits, sensory issues, social fatigue, hyperfixations, executive dysfunction, and they have this light bulb moment of, wait a minute, that's not my kid you're describing, that's me.
The sources mention a grief cycle for these late diagnosed adults. That really hit me hard. You'd think it would just be a huge relief to finally get an answer.
It is a relief. That moment of, I'm not broken, I'm 3. AuDHD is life-changing. But it's also very often accompanied by grief. You grieve for the struggling child you were. You grieve for the years you spent thinking you were just lazy or too sensitive or difficult. You suddenly realize you've been playing the game of life on hard mode without even knowing it, while blaming yourself for not keeping up.
That reframing is just so powerful. Let's talk about how this all plays out with other people. In relationships. Segment 6. There's a myth we need to bust right now, and it's a big one. The idea that autistic people lack empathy.
This is a very old, very pervasive, and very damaging myth. The new understanding that's really gaining traction is centered around something called the double empathy problem.
Okay, unpack that for me. What does that mean?
Basically, the old view was a one-way street. Autistic people don't understand neurotypicals, therefore autistic people have an empathy deficit. The new view, the double empathy model, says that communication breakdowns happen between different neurotypes. It's a mutual cross-cultural misunderstanding.
Give me an example of that.
Autistic people often communicate just fine with other autistic people. They tend to be more direct, literal, honest, and they share information freely. The disconnect happens when an autistic person tries to talk to a neurotypical person who relies heavily on subtext, hints, unspoken rules, and reading between the lines.
So it's not that one person's communication style is broken, it's that they're speaking two different social languages.
Exactly. The neurotypical person is confused by the directness and might perceive it as rude. Why were they so blunt?
And the autistic person is confused by the vagueness and subtext. Why don't they just say what they mean? It takes two people to have a misunderstanding.
And what about empathy itself, the actual feeling? Well, far from lacking empathy, many AuDHD individuals experience what's called hyperempathy. They feel too much. They can be physically distressed by someone else's pain, or even the pain of an animal or a character in a movie. They might shut down or appear blank-faced in an emotional situation, not because they don't care, but because they are so overwhelmed by the intensity of the emotion that their entire nervous system trips a breaker to protect itself.
Which brings us to another huge concept. RSD, or projection-sensitive dysphoria. This is a big one in the ADHD world, but it seems to be amplified here.
It's huge.
Yeah.
And it's so often misunderstood. RSD is not just being sensitive or having your feelings hurt. The sources describe it as an extreme, almost physical emotional pain that's triggered by perceived rejection or criticism.
And perceived is the key word there, right?
It's the most important word. It could be a neutral facial expression from a boss, a text message from a friend that's a little slower to arrive than usual, a slightly different tone of voice from a partner. The AuDHD brain, which is a hypervigilant pattern recognition machine, might interpret that tiny deviation as, they hate me, I'm annoying, this relationship is over.
And the physiological response to that perception.
It's intense and it's immediate. It can feel like a physical blow to the chest. It can trigger a massive, instantaneous drop in mood that feels completely bottomless.
And that must have a huge impact on relationships.
A massive one. It can lead to intense people-pleasing and perfectionism, this idea of, if I'm perfect, nobody can ever find a reason to reject me. Or it can lead to avoiding relationships and social situations entirely, just to avoid the risk of that pain.
The sources also talk about this dynamic that can happen in long-term partners, the parent-child dynamic. I think a lot of couples, neurodivergent or not, might recognize this.
This is a very common trap. One partner, often the neurotypical one, or the one with slightly better executive function, takes on the manager role. The reminding, the organizing, sometimes the nagging. And the neurodivergent partner gets pushed into the child role.
Did you pay the bill? Did you remember to take out the trash? Why are your keys in the refrigerator again?
Exactly. And it kills intimacy. It breeds resentment on both sides. The manager feels burdened and exhausted, and the child feels shamed, controlled, and incompetent.
So what's the fix? How do you get out of that trap?
You have to change the mechanism of how you get things done. One strategy that the sources highlight is body doubling.
What's that?
Instead of saying, go clean the kitchen, which feels like an order and can trigger that demand avoidance, you say, hey, let's go tackle our chores together. Just having someone else physically present in the room, working alongside you, provides the dopamine and accountability to get the task done. It's like a primitive herd instinct.
Oh.
The tribe is working, so now my brain can work.
And parallel play was another one.
I love this one. It's the concept of being alone, together. You're on the couch reading a book, I'm on the other end playing a video game. We're in the same room, sharing a quiet, comfortable energy. But there's no demand for active interaction. For many neurodivergent couples, this is a deeply valid and intimate form of connection.
It's basically saying, I like you enough that I can just let you be in my silence.
That is perhaps the highest compliment an AuDHD can give to another person.
Okay, let's get really practical. Segment 7 is all about management and strategies. If you are AuDHD or you love someone who is, how do you actually thrive? Let's start with the workplace.
The modern open plan office is essentially a purpose-built torture chamber for the AuDHD brain.
It's a sensory nightmare, isn't it?
It's a complete sensory nightmare. The phone's ringing, the constant visual movement of people walking by, the flickering fluorescent lights, the smell of someone's microwaved fish. Accommodations are key. Noise-canceling headphones shouldn't be seen as rude or antisocial. They are a prosthetic for the ears. They lower the overwhelming sensory input so the brain has the capacity left to actually focus on work.
Camera off during virtual meetings is another big one that was mentioned. Why is that so helpful?
Because maintaining the I am actively listening face, the nodding, the smiling, the looking directly at the camera lens, takes an incredible amount of processing power. It's active masking. If you can turn the camera off, you can actually listen to the content without also having to perform the act of listening. You could fidget, you can look away, you can doodle, which can actually improve focus.
That's huge. What about something as simple as written instructions?
Absolutely critical. Auditory processing issues are very common. If you tell an ADHDer 3 things to do as you pass them in the hallway, they might genuinely remember one of them. The other 2 just evaporated. If you send it in a Slack message or an email, it exists in the world, it's permanent, and can be referred back to.
Which connects directly to the advice for home life. If it's not visible, it doesn't exist.
The object permanence issue. This is why the vegetable crisper drawer in the fridge is where good intentions go to die. We call it the rotter drawer.
So what's the fix for that?
You have to hack your environment. Put the condiments and things that last forever in the drawer. Put the fresh food, the things that will go bad, on the door shelves or the front of the main shelves where you can see them. Open shelving instead of cabinets. Visual timers, those analog clocks that show a red slice of time physically disappearing so you can see and feel time passing.
And the ADHD tax. I have to admit, I felt very seen by this one.
Oh, the ADHD tax. The late fees on bills you forgot about, the unused gym memberships, the food that spoils in the fridge.
It just feels like you're constantly wasting money, and it feels like a moral failing.
It does. But we have to stop viewing the ADHD tax as a moral failing. It's a disability cost. Just like building a ramp for a wheelchair user costs money. You have to try to budget for it. You acknowledge it's real. You don't beat yourself up for buying the pre-cut fruit, even if it's more expensive, because you know you'll actually eat it. If you buy the whole pineapple, it will sit on your counter until it rots. The pre-cut fruit is ultimately cheaper than the rotten pineapple you have to throw away.
Low-demand living. That was a term that came up a lot.
This is especially crucial for burnout recovery. When you are deep in that hole, you have to radically simplify your expectations. We use spoon theory. You only have a finite amount of energy, or spoons, each day.
So give me permission here. Give the listeners permission.
If you are in burnout, use paper plates. Who cares about the environment for 2 weeks? You need to save the energy of doing dishes so that you have enough energy to keep your job or feed your kids. Stop folding the laundry. Just have a clean basket and a dirty basket. Clean is better than perfectly folded and put away.
I love that. It's permission to lower the bar so you can survive.
Exactly. It's about conserving energy for what truly matters.
What about therapy? The sources are very clear about finding neuro-affirming care. What does that mean?
This is so critical. You need to find a therapist who understands this specific neurotype and isn't trying to fix you. Some older therapies, like certain forms of ABA, applied behavior analysis, focus very heavily on compliance, on making the autistic person act normal.
Which, as we've discussed, just teaches more effective masking.
And can lead to significant trauma. Neuro-affirming care focuses on supporting the person's nervous system. Occupational therapy is huge here, helping you figure out your unique sensory profile. Do you need a weighted blanket to calm down? Do you need a spin chair to wake up? It's about accommodation and self-understanding, not conversion.
And what about self-diagnosis? There is so much gatekeeping and debate about this online.
The neurodivergent community in general is very accepting of self-diagnosis as valid. And the reason is that the barriers to a formal medical diagnosis are massive. The cost, it can be thousands of dollars for an adult assessment. The waiting list can be years long. And the gender and racial bias in diagnostics is still a huge problem. The general consensus is if you have done the research, if you identify with the lived experiences of the community, and if the strategies and accommodations help you live a better life, you are welcome.
That's a really important piece of validation. Let's zoom out for our last segment, segment 8, the bigger picture. The neurodiversity paradigm.
This represents a fundamental shift from the medical model of disability to the social model of disability.
Okay, unpack that for me.
The medical model says, you have a disorder, there is something wrong with you, and we need to fix or cure you. The social model says, you have a difference. You are disabled not by your brain, but by an environment and a society that isn't built for your type of brain.
So a wheelchair user is disabled by a flight of stairs, not just by their legs. If there was a ramp, they wouldn't be disabled in that specific context.
Exactly that. And AuDHD is disabled by the open plan office, the rigid 9-to-5 workday, the expectation of constant eye contact, the fluorescent lights. If we change the environment to be more flexible and accommodating, the level of disability is dramatically reduced. It's about biodiversity. A healthy ecosystem needs all different types of organisms to thrive. Humanity needs neurodiversity.
We need the specialists. We need the deep thinkers.
We absolutely need the monotropic hyperfocusers who can study a virus for 12 hours straight without getting bored. We need the ADHD lateral thinkers who can connect two completely unrelated ideas to invent something brand new.
Speaking of community and symbols, I noticed the sources make a point of discussing the puzzle piece versus the infinity loop.
Yes, this is something you'll want to be aware of.
Yeah.
The puzzle piece symbol is seen as controversial by many in the community. Historically, it was associated with Autism Speaks, an organization that many autistic advocates feel doesn't represent their best interests. The symbol itself implies confusion or that the person is a missing piece.
As if they're a puzzle that needs to be solved by someone else.
Right. The infinity loop, which is often gold for autism or a rainbow for neurodiversity in general, is the symbol preferred by the community. It represents the idea of a spectrum of infinite possibilities, a continuity, not a broken puzzle that needs fixing.
That's a much more beautiful and empowering image.
It is.
As we wrap up here, I want to go back to that central idea of the tug of war. If you are living with this, it can feel like a constant draining struggle. But the sources also make a point to highlight the strengths that come from this unique wiring.
Absolutely. The creativity, the deep sense of justice, the resilience, the unique problem-solving abilities. When you have a brain that makes connections that others don't see because you have that high neural density, and you combine that with a brain that seeks novelty and innovation, you get innovators. You get artists. You get people who change the world because they literally cannot think inside the box. They don't even know where the box is.
I think the biggest single takeaway for me from all this research is the necessary shift from judgment to curiosity.
That is the entire key.
If you, or someone you love, fits this profile, the goal is to stop asking, what is wrong with you? And to start asking, okay, how does this machine actually work?
Yes. What is the user manual for this specific brain? Maybe that laziness you've been berating yourself for is actually executive dysfunction. Maybe that bad attitude is actually sensory overload. When you change the lens through which you see the behaviors, you change your entire life.
And that journey from I'm broken to this is just how my brain works, that seems like the most important trip anyone can take.
It's the journey to self-compassion. And in the end, that is everything.
I want to leave you with one final thought. We've talked a lot today about how the world isn't built for AuDHD brains. But just imagine for a second if it was. Imagine a world that prioritized deep flow states, flexible time, direct and honest communication, and sensory comfort for everyone.
You know, that sounds like a pretty nice world for everyone, actually, not just neurodivergent people.
Doesn't it? Maybe by accommodating AuDHD, we actually end up building a better, more humane world for all of us. Something to think about. Thanks for diving in with us today.
My pleasure.